The moment I heard my mother say, "Well, someone has to do it," I knew exactly who that someone was going to be. It was always me. I want to be clear about something before I get into this, because I've had people in my life tell me I'm exaggerating, that I'm being dramatic, that families are messy and you just deal with it. But what happened at Thanksgiving last year wasn't something you just deal with. What happened broke something open in my family that I think needed to break open a long time ago. And the person who finally cracked it wasn't me. It was my dad, quiet, patient, never raises his voice, who I don't think I've ever seen cry in my 32 years of being his kid. He cried that day. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My wife and I got married 4 years ago. We have a daughter who just turned 2, and we live about 40 minutes outside of Edmonton in a house we bought right before the pandemic. My wife. I'll just call her my wife in this story, because she asked me not to use her name online. She grew up in Red Deer, youngest of 3 kids, and her family is the kind of family where you show up with a six-pack and end up staying 6 hours. Easy people. Her mom hugs you the minute you walk in the door. Her dad makes the same 3 jokes every time and they never stop being funny to him. My family is different. I don't say that as a complaint exactly. I say it as a fact, the way you might say. The weather in January is different in Edmonton than it is in Victoria. It just is. My family has 3 boys. I'm the youngest. My oldest brother lives in Kelowna with his wife and their 2 kids. My middle brother lives in Calgary, married, no kids, and then there's me. My mom grew up in a household where women ran the kitchen and men stayed out of it. She's never said that out loud as a policy, but she's lived it her whole life. She does Thanksgiving, she does Christmas, she does Easter, she plans it, shops for it, cooks most of it, and sets the table the way she likes it. And for a long time, that was fine. She had the energy for it. She wanted to do it. We all just showed up and ate. But somewhere over the last 6 or 7 years, something shifted. My mom started needing more help. And the help, when it came, always came from one direction. My wife. My oldest brother's wife Denise has a thing with her back, always has. She can't stand for too long, can't lift heavy pots. We all accommodated that a long time ago, and I'm not saying she's faking it or anything like that. But she's also the one who somehow manages to carry a full hiking pack every summer in Banff. So make of that what you will. My middle brother's wife, Therese, is what I can only describe as a professional guest. She arrives looking perfect. She brings a nice bottle of wine, she compliments everything exactly once. And then she sits down and does not move from that chair until it's time to go home. She's not rude about it, she's just settled. Like a cat who has decided that spot on the couch belongs to her, and she sees no reason to debate the matter. And then there's my wife. My wife grew up helping, it's in her. She doesn't even think about it. She walks into a kitchen and her hands just start moving. She sees a stack of dishes and she's already rolling up her sleeves. When we first started dating, I thought it was one of the most beautiful things about her. I still do, but I also have spent the last 4 years watching my family, my mother, my brothers, their wives, slowly, completely, without any apparent guilt, let her carry everything. Last Thanksgiving was the breaking point. We had driven up Friday night, the 3 of us. Our daughter in her car seat conked out by the time we hit Leduc. My mom had texted me earlier in the week saying she needed help Saturday morning. Could we come early? I said sure. What she meant by help turned out to be my wife in the kitchen from 7:30 in the morning until the meal was served at 4 in the afternoon. 8.5 hours. On her feet, in a kitchen that isn't hers, with a toddler who kept escaping the living room, and had to be chased down every 20 minutes. My oldest brother and his family didn't arrive until noon. Denise sat at the kitchen table and asked my wife questions about what she was making, which I think was her way of feeling involved without actually being involved. My middle brother and Therese showed up at 2. Therese asked if she could do anything, and when my wife said oh, the potatoes need mashing if you don't mind. Therese said, I have an idea, why don't we let the boys do it? Laughed like she'd said something very clever, and then went to find my mom in the living room. I mashed the potatoes. But the point isn't the potatoes. The point is my wife's face by the time we sat down to eat. She'd been on her feet for 8 hours. Our daughter had knocked a pot of cranberry sauce off the counter around 1 o'clock. Not a disaster, nothing burned. But it splattered across the lower cabinets, and my wife had gotten down on her hands and knees to clean it up while I held our daughter and tried to keep her from getting into it. My mom had seen the mess, said oh goodness, and then gone back to the living room. That was the moment that lives in my head now. My wife on the floor with a roll of paper towels, our daughter squirming in my arms, and my mom walking away. When we sat down my wife was quiet. Not upset quiet, or at least she was doing a good job of keeping it contained. She ate slowly, she laughed at the right times, she's good at that. But I know her face. After dinner the dishes needed doing. Denise disappeared to check on the kids. Therese said she was going to help my mom with dessert. What this meant in practice was that Therese and my mom sat at the island talking while my wife cleared the table, scraped the plates, ate, loaded the dishwasher, hand-washed the things that couldn't go in the dishwasher, and cursed the leftovers. I was helping. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't just sitting there, but I also kept getting pulled away. My brother wanted to show me something on his phone, about a property he was thinking of investing in. My dad needed help moving a table back against the wall. My daughter needed a diaper change. Every time I came back to the kitchen, my wife was still there, still working, and nobody else was. At some point, it was maybe around 6:30, my dad came into the kitchen. He does this sometimes. Just wanders in, doesn't always say anything, just kind of orbits wherever the action is. He stood in the doorway for a while and watched. My wife was washing a roasting pan, the kind that's awkward to clean, takes 2 hands, requires real effort. Her back was to him. She didn't know he was there. He stood there for a long time. Long enough that I noticed him, and then noticed him noticing her, and felt something tighten in my chest that I couldn't name yet. He turned around and went back into the living room. My wife finished the dishes around 7. Our daughter had fallen asleep on the couch in the living room. Just crashed out right there in the middle of everything, the way toddlers do. My wife dried her hands on a dish towel and leaned against the counter, and I went over to her and I said quietly, "You doing okay?" She looked at me and she said, "I'm tired." That's all she said. But the way she said it, she wasn't just tired from the day. She was tired in a way that had been building for a long time, and she'd been polite enough to not let anyone see it. I was the person she'd finally let see it. And I felt like the worst husband in the world in that moment, even though I'd tried. Even though I'd mashed the potatoes and done the diaper. And helped with the table, because I hadn't stopped it. I'd known it was happening for years, and I hadn't said anything to my family. And I'd told myself it was because I didn't want to make it weird. Didn't want to start something, and that was true. But the more complete truth was that I was conflict avoidant in a way I'd never fully admitted to myself, and it had cost my wife 4 years of Thanksgivings and Christmases, Easters and random Sunday dinners, where she walked in and immediately started doing things nobody else was doing. We were getting our daughter's coat on when my dad came back into the front hallway. I want to describe my dad accurately here, because I think it matters. He's 68. He retired from Alberta Health Services about 3 years ago, spent his whole career in hospital administration. He's not a man who talks about feelings. He's not a man who makes speeches. He grew up in a household even more traditional than my mom's, if you can believe it, and over the years he's mostly operated as a quiet presence. Supportive, present, dependable, but not someone who inserts himself into things. If my mom runs the domestic world of that house, my dad lets her. So when he stopped in the doorway of the hallway and said, "Before you go," I figured he was going to tell me about the property my brother had mentioned, or ask me about something to do with our mortgage. Instead, he looked at my wife. He looked at her for a moment, and then he said, "You worked hard today. I watched. I want you to know I saw that, and I think it was too much to put on you." My wife blinked. She didn't say anything right away. My dad said, "I should have said something earlier. I didn't, and I'm sorry for that. But I want to say it now." He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at my brothers, who were still in the living room. He was just looking at her. My wife said, "Thank you. That means a lot." Her voice cracked a little bit on the last word. She smiled anyway. My dad nodded once, the way he does, and then he went back to the living room. We got in the car and I drove the first 20 minutes without saying anything because I didn't know what to say. My daughter slept. My wife looked out the passenger window at the highway and the dark and the distant lights of the city. Finally she said, "He didn't have to do that." I said, "I know." She said, "You know that's the first time anyone in your family has ever said anything like that to me?" I'd known, but I didn't want to know. There's a difference. "I know," I said again. "And, I'm sorry, I should have been the one to say it. A long time ago." She didn't say anything to that. Not accusatory, not forgiving, just quiet. The kind of quiet that means she's processing, and she'd rather process than argue. And we'd talk about it properly when we got home and our daughter was in bed. We talked about it properly when we got home and our daughter was in bed. I'm not going to put all of that in that conversation here because some of it is ours and I want to keep it ours. But what I can tell you is that my wife told me that night some things she'd been holding back for years. Things about feeling invisible at family events. Things about walking into my mom's kitchen and feeling like she'd been assigned a role she never applied for. Things about watching Denise and Therese get to be guests while she got to be the help. Things about wanting to say something, but not wanting to put me in a difficult position with my own family. And about how she'd started to resent me a little bit for never noticing enough to step in. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't crying. She was just telling me the truth, the way she would have told me a long time ago, if I'd created the kind of space where she felt like she could. I hadn't. I'd kept the peace by ignoring the problem, which isn't really keeping the peace, it's just deferring the damage. I called my dad the following week. I want to be honest about my motives here, because I've thought about them since. Part of me called to thank him. Part of me called because I was ashamed that he'd seen what I'd been too close to see clearly. And I needed to say that out loud to someone. And part of me, a bigger part than I'm comfortable admitting, called because I needed to understand how he'd gotten there. He'd lived in that same house for 40 years, with the same dynamics. And he'd never said anything before either. What had shifted? He answered on the third ring. I told him I was calling about Thanksgiving. He said, I know. I said, what you said to her meant a lot. I mean it. She cried a little bit in the car. Long pause. My dad's pauses are deliberate. He doesn't fill silence the way some people do. He said, I've been watching for a long time. I just kept thinking your mother would notice, or one of your brothers would say something, or you would. And nobody did. And at some point you stopped waiting for someone else to do it. Said, why didn't you say anything earlier? Another pause. He said, same reason you didn't. That landed somewhere in my chest, and sat there. He said, she's a good woman. She's good to you, and she's good to your daughter, and she's good to your mother. She's good to your mother even when your mother doesn't deserve it. I should have told her that before now. I'm glad I did. We talked for another half an hour. About nothing specific really. About the property my brother was considering. Bad idea, too much commercial risk, right now in that market. About my daughter, who my dad is absolutely crazy about even though he expresses it by making extremely serious faces at her, and talking to her about birds. About the winter coming in. Before I hung up I said, I'm going to talk to Mom. He said, good. I said, and to my brothers. He said, even better. Those conversations were harder. My mom's first response was defensive. She hadn't asked my wife to do anything, my wife just did things. She couldn't help that my wife was more capable than the other two, which, I want to note, is an extraordinary thing to say. My mom essentially complimented my wife, by way of explaining why it was fine to let her do all the work. Which is such a specific kind of logic that I didn't quite know how to respond to it. I told her, Mom, whether or not she's capable isn't the point. The point is that she's been working 8, 9 hours on her feet every time we come here. And Denise and Therese aren't, and you haven't noticed. My mom said, well, maybe they should be doing more. I said yes, they should. But in the meantime, you could also notice. She didn't say much after that, but she didn't defend it again either, which I think is about as much as I could expect in one conversation. My oldest brother's reaction was mostly surprise. He said he genuinely hadn't realized. I believe him, actually. He's not a malicious person. He's just oblivious in the specific way that people are oblivious when a system benefits them, and they've never had reason to look at the system. I told him that next time he was helping in the kitchen. Full stop. He said okay, I'll believe it when I see it, but he said okay. My middle brother gave me a 10-minute speech about how Therese had a different upbringing, and wasn't comfortable in other people's kitchens. And that we needed to respect that. I told him I respected it. And also, it wasn't acceptable. He didn't love that. We're still a little prickly with each other, that's fine. I'd rather be prickly and honest than smooth and complicit. This past Easter was the test. My wife and I talked beforehand. We came up with a plan. We were going to arrive Saturday like usual, but when my mom started assigning things. She does this in her way. Not directly, more like leaving things conspicuously undone until someone picks them up. My wife was going to let them sit, and I was going to be the one to step in. It was awkward. I'm not going to pretend it was some triumphant movie moment, where everything flowed naturally and everyone felt good. My mom gave me a look when I started working on the salads. Denise made a comment about how things were different these days. Therese actually helped with the potatoes. Though she complained a bit about the masher we had. But my wife sat in the living room with our daughter. And my dad, and at one point, I looked through the doorway and they were doing a puzzle together on the floor. The three of them, my daughter handing my dad pieces that didn't go where he was trying to put them, and my dad accepting each piece, with complete seriousness, and attempting to make them work. My wife looked up and caught me watching. She smiled. Not a polite smile, not an everything is fine smile. A real one. I know this isn't a fully resolved story. My mom still defaults to certain patterns. My brothers are works in progress. Therese is always going to find a reason to hold a wine glass and watch other people work. These things don't fix overnight and they don't fix from one conversation. But I think about what my dad did. The smallness of it actually, how small it was as a gesture. He stood in a hallway and said, I saw you, and what happened to you wasn't right, and I should have said something sooner. That was all. 6 sentences maybe. He didn't reorganize the family. He didn't confront my mom or my brothers or their wives. He just looked at my wife, like she was a person who mattered and said the thing that was true. And it cracked something open. I've been thinking a lot about the kind of silence that isn't neutral. The kind where you're watching something unfair happen, and you tell yourself it's not your place. Or it'll sort itself out. Or someone else will handle it. My dad had been that silence for 40 years. I had been that silence for 4. And the difference between him and me is that at 68, at the end of a long Thanksgiving day, he finally got tired of it. I'm 32. I don't want to wait until I'm 68. My wife still does more than she should at family events. I'm still learning how to push back on that in real time, instead of just noticing it after the fact. Our daughter is going to watch how her parents move through the world, what they let go and what they don't. And she's going to make her own conclusions about what's normal and what's acceptable. I think about that more than almost anything else now. The puzzle was almost finished when I came back from the kitchen. My daughter had one piece left, and she was studying it the way toddlers study things, with her whole face, like it was the most serious problem she'd ever encountered. She got it in. My dad said, "Well done," in exactly the tone he'd use if a colleague had correctly analyzed a budget forecast. Our daughter looked up at him with complete delight, because she understands nothing about budget forecasts, and everything about being told she did something right. My wife laughed. A real one. The kind I fell in love with. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not the blow-ups, not the hard conversations, not the prickliness with my brother or the defensiveness from my mom. Just that. My wife laughing in the living room of my parents' house. Our daughter, proud of herself. My dad quietly glad. And me finally in the doorway. Not in the kitchen alone. Not somewhere I shouldn't be. Not pretending not to see what I'd always seen. Just there. Where I should have been the whole time.